All right, fellas, let's get this in. So today we're going to be talking about an area of our lives that we as men tend to struggle with consistency in, and it is our faith. It has been a conversation that I'm having over and over with men about they desire to spend more time with God. They desire to have a stronger prayer life. They desire to have a better relationship with God, but for some reason they just cannot be consistent. By the way, this is something I have struggled with before in my life before, and we're going to be addressing this idea because there is, I believe there's several reasons why we're inconsistent, but there's really one underlying reason why we are consistent. And we'll talk about what it's costing us, guys. I mean, this inconsistency in this area of our life is costing us a lot in every other area of life. So we got to talk about it. We got to address it today on Elite Performance with Dr. Brad. Let's get it. All right, so let's talk about this idea about the number one reason why we as men struggle with inconsistency in our faith. And the reason I feel qualified to talk about this is because for a very long time, I was extremely inconsistent with my faith. And unfortunately, that showed up in a lot of other different areas of our life. And so if this is something I've struggled with, I know that there are some other brothers out here that are struggling with the exact same thing. When I say brothers, just know, I mean my brothers, like brotherhood. I ain't talking about black folks. I'm talking about everybody, my brothers. Anybody who's listening to this, my brothers. If you're one of my sisters and you listen to this, that's cool too. But obviously, I focus on men and I focus on the brothers. And so if I'm dealing with this, I know there's some other brothers who are dealing with this. And so there's this problem of inconsistency in our faith. And so this shows up in several different ways. It shows up in us not having a prayer life with God, or that prayer life is extremely inconsistent. It's not every day, right? We don't really have a system. We don't have kind of a practical guide or schedule for spending time with God. When life gets in the way, we just don't spend that time. For many of us, if we are church goers, and I say that because some of us aren't church goers, and if you are not a church goer, does not mean anything other than the fact that you don't go to church. Okay. One of my struggles right now is that churches aren't really, and some of, man, I tell you, I may rub some people the wrong way when I say this, but understand I say this with concern, is that I don't feel like church is helping with change. I don't feel like a lot of people are changing that go to church. So church is a little bit of an issue for me, but that's a whole sidebar. But the point I'm making is that if you are a church goer and you're not going to church, that might be another way that this presents itself as an inconsistency in your faith. We don't read the word. We don't read the Bible. We start getting distracted. This is another way that this shows up, because the less we're spending time with God, the more we're getting distracted from temptations in areas of our life that are lustful, right? 3 W's. We start getting distracted with women, wealth, and winning. So our focus changes to other areas, okay? And we start to stray far away from him. And this, when these things manifest, unfortunately, we feel frustrated. We feel shameful at ourselves because we have a desire. We know it's important, but it's just not getting done. So we have this feeling of shame. We have this feeling of guilt. We have this feeling like we're so far away from God. Like, how am I going to come back to God? We get fed up. We get stuck. We get unfulfilled. And if you're anything like me, you probably recognize, like, you know what? Whenever I'm spending time with God consistently, life just seems to be better. Like, life just seems to be more peaceful. Life maybe even seem to be more productive. By the way, you'll hear me drop some of these parenthetical thoughts in there every now and then. But just so you know, Proximity to God equals peace. Proximity to God equals productivity. Proximity to God equals peak performance. So yes, you may notice that listen, when I'm spending more time with God, life tends to get better. Like, how did I get off the mark? You know, and so we get inconsistent. And we therefore start feeling and kind of start beating ourselves up about it. And I get it. And unfortunately, we get inconsistent. We'll then get consistent. We're like, all right, I'm going to get my act together. I'm going to spend some time. And then we get consistent for a little while. We start to see some change in our life a little while. We start to see some peace in our lives for a little bit. And then we find ourselves, things get better, and then eventually get back to being inconsistent with him. And it just ends up being this vicious cycle of consistency for a little, of really temporary consistency, but really being consistent at being inconsistent in our relationship with God. Anybody feel what I'm saying on that? Is that sometimes probably the most consistent thing you've done is been inconsistent in that relationship with God. Listen, I've been there and I get it. And I have to say this real quick so that we all understand this. This is costing us. There is a big price that we're paying because of this. Now, whether you realize it or not, I mean, I don't know. You may be aware of what it's costing you. Now, I've been on the other side of this thing to see what it has cost me. Like when I look backwards and I say, man, at that time when I was really inconsistent with God, what was it costing me? Well, it was costing me my peace, right? It was costing me my peace. If you don't know this, one of the things that you need in order to be productive is peace. It is very difficult for you to think clearly about things that are important in your life and make critical decisions, making critical decisions for your family, making critical decisions for your finances, making critical decisions for your fitness. You don't have the mental energy when you're distracted, when you don't have clarity, when you don't have discernment to be able to make great decisions. At the end of the day, we're a collection of decisions that we make. And so when we don't have that clarity because we don't have peace, because we're far away from the Prince of Peace, I got a million things running in my head right now after that. But if we don't spend time with the Prince of Peace, how are we going to get peace? Therefore, we struggle with our productivity. Therefore, we struggle in our relationships. We struggle in our health. We struggle in our wealth because of that. So it is costing us in every area of life. And ultimately, it is costing us being the best men that we can be, showing up as the best fathers, husbands, business owners, leaders, people in our community. So yes, this is extremely important for us to do. And like I said, we've witnessed it in our lives whenever we have noticed, when you look back and say, you know what, man, when I had that consistency in that time with God, like things were good. How did I get off again? Right? Now, listen, here's the deal. I've been there, so I know exactly how you feel. I have definitely been there, and I was a master of consistently being inconsistent in my relationship with God before. Right. And so here's how most of us think. And here's kind of how most of us get to this part. Most of us think it's like when we think about our faith, again, we know it's important. We know our relationship with God is important, and that it's important enough to address, almost important enough to be shameful about when we don't, or feel guilty about when we don't spend that time. But it doesn't seem important enough to prioritize. And I think that's one of the things that bothers us. Like, it's important enough. We know it's important enough for us to do, but one of the frustrations is like, why am I not prioritizing it? Right. And so one of the things that happens is that, life gets busy. We get busy with work. We get busy with, for a lot of us, it's work. We get busy with work. We get busy with life. We get busy with kids. We get busy with tasks. We get busy with the to-do list. And when life gets busy with all of our commitments, then the spiritual life gets edged out, right? And so the next thing you know, you're feeling far from God, and you start living in a way that is completely opposite from the man that you intended to be. And oftentimes we believe, and for many men, we believe that it's a consistency issue, that if I could just get my act together and just be consistent, then I'll be okay. Or we think it's a time issue. Like, man, if I just had more time, then I will be able to spend that time with God. Or once I finish this task, then I will be able to, then I will spend time with God once I kind of get some free time. So we think it's a time issue, or we think it's a consistency issue. But here's what I found. Is that What if it's not really a consistency issue? What if it's not a time issue? What if it's something else that is really causing this? What if there's something underlying the consistency? What if there's something else underlying the time and work life balance issue that's really manifesting itself as inconsistency in our faith, right? Well, here's what I've come to realize is that there's really one underlying reason why we as men struggle in our consistency in our faith. And it is one word and one word only. It is pride. Now, see, I should have prefaced before I said that word, telling you like this is probably going to be a punch in the gut for you if you listen to this. This is probably not going to feel good. None of us want to admit that we are prideful, right? But the reality is, it's pride, and I want you to hear me out on this. I've experienced it, right? And when I say pride, it's not like we're sitting here saying out loud like I know that I'm better than God, or I know that I don't need God. But I want you to hear me out. Our actions follow our attitudes. Our behaviors follow our beliefs. We don't behave in a certain way unless there's an underlying belief. And so if our lives are presenting itself in such a way where we are living it without God, well, then in essence, what it's saying is, well, underlying, we're saying, you know what? I think I can live my life without God, making decisions on my own, not having that relationship with Him. And therefore, if you think that way, it will present that way. However, if there is a true deep down belief that we must have a dependence on God, well, then guess what? It reflects in our behaviors that we have a relationship that we know it must be prioritized because our everything in life is dependent on it. And so oftentimes we, in essence, we fail to see or accept that we really ain't running the show like we think we are. We fail to accept help, which is immediately available to us, help from God that is immediately available to us. We fail to yield to the fact that He is God and we are not. Like, think about that. Like, He is God, the creator of heaven and earth, those things that are seen and unseen. You know, like, I don't know if I've ever created anything unseen. I mean, like, but we fail to yield to the idea that He is God and that we are not. And that if we're living in a way such that it shows that we're not having Him in our life as priority, well, then somewhere deep down deep inside of us, we have a belief that we can do it without Him. Now, see, it never comes across to us that way. Like we're not aware of that thought. We're just aware of the behavior. But we become consistent in having that relationship with God when we address the underlying issue of the fact that we have to first believe that we need Him. Right? We have to first really, really believe that we need Him. And for some of us, we don't come to that conclusion until we hit our heads really hard because of the decisions that we have made without having Him with us. Okay. And so this has been going on since the beginning of time, right? You know, in essence, here's all I need you to understand. And I say this all the time, but our beliefs follow, or our behaviors follow our beliefs. If you look at the story of in Genesis, when Eve ate the apple, I'm not blaming Eve. It's not all Eve's fault, right? But the point I'm making is if you look at mankind in general, okay, Satan deceived Eve to believe. Now, before I even go there, realize we had it all. We had everything, right? Everything. We had food, we had a companion, we had a spouse, we had everything we needed. it was the Garden of Eden. It was paradise, right? We had no reason to not want anything else because we had everything we needed. Plus, we had direct relationship with God. But Satan was able to deceive us that maybe, just maybe, we can have life without God. The Bible talks about Satan, in essence, deceived Eve to believe that once they ate the apple, that they would be like God. And at that point, that they really could be like God. I mean, if you could be like God, do you really need God? Right? So just being intrigued on being like God and being independent from God was something that's been going on since the beginning of time, right? So here's one of the keys is that when one of the things that hurts us with this pride thing is that we don't yield to a higher power, or we don't yield to an authority, or we don't yield to the idea that we know we need help from something else. And that's something that as men is difficult for us to do. We don't yield to the idea that we know we need help to basically be able to say, hey, listen, I relent to the fact that you know more than me, and you're the expert at something, and I'm going to willingly follow you and receive help from you. But there are times in our life when we do that. Oftentimes when we go to the doctor, we're saying, hey, listen, I know I have a problem, but I don't, you know, but I don't know how to fix it. So I'm just going to follow you, right? We're more willing to follow someone's lead when we say, listen, you know, I don't know, right? When we become dependent on someone else for our helps and needs, like, then it works out. So it's not like we're not able to. It's not like we're not able to yield. We have to become aware and willingly say, I need the help. No different than when, if my knee is hurting, or if your knee is hurting, or something's hurting, you don't know the answer. You just know it's hurting, and you say, you know what, I need help. Or there's some sort of legal issue you have a problem with, and you know you can't do it on your own. So you say, hey, let me go to a lawyer because they know more and better than me. But we need to get to a point to willingly say, you know what, I cannot do life. I cannot do work and life on my own. Therefore, I will willingly go to the expert of life. I will willingly go to the bread of life. I will willingly go to the living water, okay, for help. So that is one of the things that we have to be able to do, is just to simply yield, okay? And so how can we be more consistent with our relationship with God? Before I really go into that, I'm gonna just tell you a brief story. Um, because there's really two things. It's not until you willingly admit that you can't do it alone, or it hurts bad enough to come to the conclusion that you can't do it on your own, is when you yield. Right? So I'll say that again. It's not until, number one, you willingly admit that you cannot do it on your own, or it hurts bad enough to come to the conclusion that you can't do it on your own, is when you will yield. Let me just tell you, it's much easier if you willingly yield as opposed to fighting with it. Because see, my story is, at the most successful as I was, or as many people consider success, being monetary success, material success, right? I was at my lowest in terms of just how effective I was being as a husband, father, and my health and my wealth and my relationships, right? Wealth was actually doing pretty good, but I wouldn't say it was a healthy wealthy. It was an unhealthy wealthy in terms of how I was generating wealth, how I was managing money. But in my health, certain areas of my wealth and relationships, it was it was poor. My success was costing me all of that stuff. And so I just remember I wanted life to be better. Like, I did not sign up for being a horrible husband. I didn't sign up for being an angry father. I didn't sign up for, you know, for being out of shape like I was. I just didn't sign up for being less of the man that I wanted to be at, you know, and only being successful in one area of my life. And it wasn't until I just got to a point in my life where I was hurting so bad that there was one door open. There was one door that was left open because I tried everything. I tried working hard. I tried being more consistent. I tried just whipping myself into shape. I tried just saying, you know what, let me just move some things around the time. So in essence, I realized that I just tried to be more consistent. I tried to do more things. I tried to fix the tasks. I tried to work on all of the like to do stuff to get better. Tried to read books, tried to do all this stuff. But it wasn't until, and I felt like I tried every option of every door that said, try this and it might work. Try this to help you become a better, to help you have a better life. And it was one door of God that was open still, that I hadn't tried yet. And it was like, I didn't want to go in that door because I was afraid of what it was going to cost me. But the reality is it was already costing me way too much. Okay, and we're going to get to this cost thing in a second, but it's already costing me way too much. When I come to that conclusion, I said, you know what? I'm going to try this God thing. I'm going to try to build a relationship with God and see if it works. And as I did that, it wasn't until I yielded to the idea that I really needed him in a way that I had yet to experience him that things started to turn around. Okay. It it wasn't until I yielded to him to say, look, I'm gonna try and do this with you. Okay. And so how can we build how can we have more consistency in our relationship with God? Or how can we start to address this pride that's not allowing us to be consistent? So just so that we're clear, understand what I'm saying is that our pride does not allow us to be consistent. Our way of thinking about our relationship with God does not allow us to be consistent. It's not a consistency issue. A consistency is a byproduct of the fact that we have pride in our hearts since the beginning of time, since the beginning of man. Okay. So there's three things that I think we can do. One, you got to realize that this yielding thing comes at a cost, right? Anything you're trying to be consistent at is going to come at a cost, right? You can either pay it up front or you're going to pay for it on the back end of not being consistent, but it's going to cost you something. The thing that matters most in our lives, hear me out now. When we're born, we're not born with this intrinsic desire to worship God or worship Satan. Do you know what we have an intrinsic desire to worship when we are born? It's ourselves. We want, life is about us. It's about the Dr. Brad show. It's about the you show. You trying to survive. You're trying to thrive. You're trying to do everything for you. So God says, listen, in order for consistency in this relationship to work, it's going to cost you what you worship the most, which is you. He said, listen, there's only room on the throne for one person, and it's me. And that's hard, man. And let me tell you, that's hard, particularly for brothers like myself who you like to be in control, man. Like I like to be in control. I like to know what's happening. I want to have my hands on things. I'm gonna be like, hey, man, listen, I'm like, I need to know what's going on, God. Like I need to have some say in this, right? It's hard to say, listen, you want to be consistent. It's gonna cost you something. But look at everything, so many things in our lives that we're consistent at. Like I consistently take care of my kids, but it's cost me a lot, right? It costs you to be with your kids. It costs money. It costs time away from us. So we are dedicated. Because it costs us so much up front, we become consistent in it. It cost me $200,000 to go to med school. Guess what? I showed up every day. It cost me up front, right? But if I didn't do it, it was going to cost me on the back end, right? So the point I'm making is this: is like Pay the cost up front right now of yielding yourself. Pay the cost of yourself to say, you know what? As much as you can, say, I'm going to yield, take my butt off the throne, or at least take one butt cheek off the throne to allow God to sit there fully. Okay? Because if you don't pay now with what is that greatest cost of ourselves to pay that cost, it's going to cost you on the back end of what inconsistency is going to cost you. Inconsistency in this relationship is going to cost you health, wealth, and relationships. May already be. So pay the cost up front of you, so it's not going to cost you your life later. Okay. Second thing is community. Get around a group of brothers that really are looking to live a life that is prioritizing their relationship with God, where they're doing that consistently. And you can see their lives having a certain level of peace. You see their life, that faith is not just an aspect of their life, right? They live their life by faith. See, that's part of the issue, is that when we don't have this consistency, faith becomes this aspect, this slice of pie in our life. No, faith should be the foundation of it all, so that when you look at any area of our life, it is influenced by faith, by a foundation of faith. But when we don't have this consistency, faith becomes this aspect of our life. Like the same way we talk about, like, oh, well, I got my business, I got my family, I got this, I got my faith. No. Faith should be the foundation with which, when I look at my business, my family, my workout, all of that stuff sits on a foundation of that relationship with God. It should be reflected in how I live in each of the areas of my life, not just on Sunday. Okay. Again, which is why I kind of have somewhat of an issue with church right now. But again, that's a whole nother podcast episode. All right. So community, find some people who are living it out. And then 3 is chronicle. What I mean by chronicle, you got to know the story of God. I start realizing a lot of brothers don't know the story of God. Like, they don't know the story of the Bible. They don't know the story of how we fail, how we're trying to be restored. A lot of people see God as this angry dude who's just like trying to come down on us. That's how I used to think. You got to know the story of God. If you need some help with the story of God, go to elitemenfulfillment.com. Again, elitemenfulfillment.com. There's a free coaching series that I offer. Well, free for now. Coaching series that I offer right now, where it'll take you through the story of God, right? So you can understand that. When you can understand that, when you really understand that story, it'll be difficult for you not to want to build a relationship with God when you understand how it works. Not a religious, traditional way of thinking. I'm talking about the real deal story. I'm not talking about religion here. I'm talking about relationship. Okay. So here is the action that I want you to take. Okay. And it's really answering a question. Are you willing to yield? Are you willing to yield? Are you willing to pay the cost up front, so you're not paying the cost of your life later? So you're not paying the cost of the lives around you, of your relationships later, because we didn't show up like the men that we were called to be. Are you willing to yield so that the consistency can be where it is that you desire it to be? And I want you to imagine what this consistency would look like. Because I'm going to tell you here, my story, the end of the story is when I finally went through that door and said, you know what? I'm going to do this thing with God. It has turned into a level of consistency with God. Follow me here, such that we're trying to wear all these hats, right? We're trying to wear the husband hat, father hat, business owner hat, leader hat, trying to stay in the best shape. And sometimes it becomes overwhelming in terms of trying to be consistent in all these areas of life. But let me make something clear. The more you are consistent in one area of life, the more you are consistent in your relationship with God, the more consistency in other areas of life happen. The more you are consistent in being in his word, the more consistency in every other area of life happens. I dare you to test it. Reason I know this works is because it's what the word says. And I've got so much practice doing it on my own and helping other guys doing it with the framework that I teach with that it happens. So I want you to imagine focusing on a consistency and add it in that area of your life, creating some structure and consistency in building a relationship with God, reading the word, and it turning into consistency in so many other areas of life. I mean, I want you to imagine that. And here's the deal, you probably don't have to imagine it. You can probably remember what it was like whenever you have been consistent, right? So, fellas, here's what I'm telling you. That imagination can turn into something spectacular. If you look at whenever you've been consistent in your relationship with God and how peaceful and productive you were at that time, imagine if you did it for years. Heck, forget years, weeks. Imagine if you did it for weeks. Imagine if you did it for weeks, what it would turn into. It turned into something that is hard to even imagine, hard to even fathom. And I'm just grateful to God I've been able to experience what that looks like in my marriage, in my relationship with my kids, in my business, in my clinic, in my coaching, in a level of peace and fulfillment that is found nowhere else. Jesus Christ. So, consistency, fellas. I don't know if it's a consistent issue when it comes to our relationship with God or a time issue. It's a yielding issue. So let's yield and watch what happens.